basically, we all know that we've just had a very exciting election. Had some great changes that happened. Some of you might be more excited about those changes than others. But we know that we now have 12 new Democratic Texas House members. Please. We have 2 new Texas senators. And of course, this changes the dynamic of the overall legislature, because we currently now have 67 Democratic House members and on the to 83 Republican House members. That is down from the 95 that they had previously. We also have 31 total state senate, and of the state senate, we now have 12 Democratic senators, where previously we had 10, and we now have 19 Republican senators. And of course, that is very important because it dictates how much control the leadership in the Senate has of moving legislative action forward. But this morning, by the way, as we look around the news and talk to people, we see that this election results have had a lot of interesting consequences for those maybe who were not reelected, but also those that were elected, and for those they have to, a lot of people have kind of pivoted and realigned themselves in many ways. We see in our own area here in North Texas, Jeff Leach from the Plano area, who was very adamant as part of the Freedom Caucus here in Texas, who has withdrawn from that caucus and submitted basically in a statement that saying that he now wants to really focus on the interests and the needs of his constituency. Also right here in North Texas, we have Mr. Strickland, who represents the Bedford area, who had likewise said that he's going to tone down his measure, the way he interacts with people, and said that he wants to reach out and represent all of his constituents, going to the extent of saying he's going to partner with a Democratic colleague to host town hall meetings, one of which he hopes to dedicate just to Democrats in his district. The type of thing that would have been unheard of, not just now, but in just a few weeks ago. We wouldn't, I believe, heard this type of talk from people. So things are changing, and to help keep us abreast of those changes and to give us some idea of what the implications might be for our educational institutions, we have a fantastic panel. They're all men, but we're thankful that they all took time from their schedule to be with us today. I'm going to briefly introduce our panelists this morning. I'm going to start off immediately here. To my right is Mr. Isaac Fox. He's the Chief Legislative Counsel for Public and Governmental Affairs at the Dallas County Community College District. He serves there as an advocate for the district and its students in Austin and in Washington, D.C. Before joining DCCD, Isaac worked as an attorney in Dallas and in the White House office of the U.S. Trade Representative. Prior to earning his Juris Doctorate from the Thurgood Marshall School of Law in Houston and his bachelor's degree from UT, Isaac attended the DCCD. He is licensed to practice law by the State Bar of Texas and is president of the Dallas Hispanic Bar Association. And he co-chaired in 2015 the Dallas Independent School District's Future Facilities Task Force. A friend from Dallas, we welcome Isaac Fox. Next to him is another friend, more recently met, but Dr. Anthony or Tony Edwards. He's the Senior Vice President for Talent Development, Retention, and Attraction for the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce. His work undergirds one of the 4 pillars, Fortify, of the Chamber's new strategic plan, which resonates strongly with goals of the 60 by 30 Texas that we all know and love so well here. He came to the Fort Worth Chamber after service as Assistant Professor and Director of the Tarleton State University Global Campus, where he oversaw academic advising, recruitment, and marketing of online programs. Prior to work in higher education, Tony taught science in Fort Worth, Granbury, and Huckabee ISDs, and completed an administrative internship at Scott and White Memorial Hospital, the clinic, and health plan. His degrees are from Texas A&M, Texas A&M Health Science, and Tarleton State University. Welcome, Dr. Edwards. Finally, our last panelist on the panel is another friend from Dallas. Garrett Landry works to assure every child has an equitable opportunity to obtain the highest quality public education as a senior office of education strategist for the Williams Family Foundation. One of Garrett's chief responsibilities is to work with school districts in alignment of evaluation, professional development, and compensation systems to maximize student outcomes. Prior to his work with the foundation, Garrett was director of special projects and special assistant to Dallas ISD Superintendent Mike Miles, with a key role in performance evaluation. He has also served as co-director of policy programs for the Teaching Trust, chief of staff for a judge in Dallas County, and director of legislative policy for a Texas House of Representatives campaign, and worked for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the National Student Leadership Conference. He's a graduate of SMU and lives with his family in Grapevine. Thank you, Garrett, for joining us this morning. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get our panel started. They've got some very simple questions that we asked them to address about their legislative priorities for the respective institutions. We asked them to speak a little bit about why their respective institutions have selected this type of priority, as well as what types of influences or things that they see that this new legislature might have impact, might create more of an opportunity perhaps for us to get this type of priority passed. So with that, no specific order, gentlemen, if Isaac, you want to take the lead right here.
Well, I just want to start off with say thank you for inviting me to be here. Look forward to the conversation. I'm glad Anna Mays is here from our district, who does a wonderful job at the Dallas County Community College District for our students. Thank you for the recap. I think it's an excellent recap that Ray de los Santos provided, because it really changes the dynamics of the Capitol this upcoming session. And he really touched on some of the points referring to Representative from Bedford, Representative Leach from the Plano area, it's actually very recent news, so very good job on keeping current events, who decided to leave the sort of, what was known as sort of a more sort of further right on the Freedom Caucus, who was responsible for really killing a lot of bills last session on the House side. Most famous, the Mother Day's Massacre. A lot of people may remember that in 2017. So him leaving, I think, also speaks volumes. Also, maybe for the fact that he only won by 1,600 votes in this district, may speak volumes to that as well. So it'll be a different dynamic at the House side. And we also, as many of you know, we have a new speaker in the House. I think, well, not yet. We have a speaker who's going to be elected in January, and he's going to be something similar to Representative Strauss or Speaker Strauss. He was a lieutenant at Ways and Means, so I think it'll be also interesting to see how we fare. He's already said public school financing is one of, if not his biggest priority in this press conference that he had in November, so that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially with the governor's team and then on the Senate side as well. So I'm looking forward to the session. I think sessions are always kind of fun and crazy. I worked in Austin during a session for state rep in Dallas, and it just goes back and forth. And many of you know it's a roller coaster ride, so sort of buckle up and see what happens. And hopefully at the end there in May, we get our priorities, across the sort of finish line, if you will, at the end of the session. But I'm looking forward to it. And same thing on the Senate side. I think it'll see what happens now that they don't have sort of that super majority anymore. And it'll be, I'm looking forward to it. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, thank you, Isaac. So I'm with the Fort Worth Chamber of Commerce, and our role, as we mentioned earlier, we have a new strategic plan called Fortify, and so and that strategic plan kind of guides most of, if not all of our work with the Chamber. We got our 4 pillars, some areas: talent development, attraction, and retention. We also have a small business and entrepreneurs support. We have business attraction, expansion, and retention, which is what most people think of as economic development for a chamber. We also have advocacy, and so we have representative teams who focus on that. We also have international strategy, and we also have what we're calling quality of place. And what we're looking at with quality of place has to do with things like poverty, transportation, housing, and how those things affect, at least in the talent arena, how they affect how people can get to work and how they can do programs that can get them further along in their career and add prosperity. So that sort of guides a lot of where we work with our legislative agenda. We've got a government relations committee, and they go through, they do a survey of our membership, find out what their biggest priorities were. No secret, education is a big thing for them, workforce is a big thing for them. We're sort of going through and figuring out what are those important things for us. Things kind of came out as a result of that. Increasing funding for public and higher education. Now, how you do that, there's the details of it. And sort of what comes out of that also is that there's a big need for at least examining the whole funding process, not just increasing the funding, but where's the money going to come from? What's that funding structure look like in terms of property taxes and all of that? So, we're looking at that very carefully. We also, as Isaac mentioned, we know that public school finance is going to be a big concern for the legislature. I know that Commander Todd Williams has been very involved in that discussion, the Public School Finance Commission, and other things. But we're also just looking at higher ed and what we can do there in terms of advocating for funding there when it's needed. And also, as is probably no secret, we know that school safety is kind of a big topic, and so we're not necessarily playing our cards as to how we implement that, but we know school safety is important. And I know there's going to be a variety of proposals that are going to come out in that way. We just know school safety is important. We're not necessarily saying, what's the right way to do that yet. We want to wait to kind of see what comes out.
All right, well, thank you all for having me. Like I said, my name's Garrett Landry. I work for the Williams Family Foundation. So that's Todd Williams, who's also the CEO of the Commit Partnership. So I also spend a lot of my time working with Commit, which is really who I'm representing today. For those of you who don't know, so Commit is an education collective impact organization. We have over 200 partners, and we focus on cradle to career, so from age 0 all the way through 22, across a number of educational indicators. We break our work into 3 work streams. The early part, which is 0 to 8, which is our Early Matters Dallas work, which is a coalition of business, community members, nonprofits, school districts, working in all things early childhood. So everything from standards and ratios to daycare centers to high quality pre-K. On the other side of the spectrum, we have our Dallas County Promise work, which is a partnership with the Community College District in Dallas, really which is community college for all of our students through last hour scholarships through the Community College Foundation, and making sure that all of our high school students, particularly those of highest need, have access to a 2-year university and certification agreements to continue on to get their last 2 years with some partnership universities. And then we have what's called our Best in Class initiative, which spans the spectrum of 0 to 22, which is all focused on teacher effectiveness. How do we retain, recruit, attract teachers into the profession? How do we lift up the profession and make sure that our educators are in front of our students who need them the very most? And so each of those buckets has their own legislative priorities, but without question, the number 1 priority that we have at Commit, and really that impacts all of that, is school finance. Mr. Williams was appointed by Governor Abbott to be on the School Finance Commission, so it's 12 months of work leading up into session, so the final report should come out pretty soon. Because school finance really drives everything. From the business side, it drives property taxes, It drives our workforce. And so I just wanted to share, because it relates to the conversation we were having beforehand, just some statistics that I think really speak to why we need to reform our school finance system. And there's a whole bunch of slides that I'll send out afterwards, so don't feel like you need to jot these down, because they'll all be in the slides, and more data than you probably need, but that's what we do. We're a data organization. But we have 5.4 million students in Texas. 1 out of 10 kids in the country are in Texas. When you look at North Texas, 1 out of 10 kids in Texas are in North Texas. So what we do here in the region not only drives the state, but to a certain extent drives our national outcomes in terms of education. Of those students, 59% of them are economically disadvantaged, considered to be within 180% of the poverty line. And 1 out of 5 are English language learners. Now, when you look at our population growth, we are growing significantly in 2 categories: low-income students and Latino students, which is going to drive up our English language learners. And what research shows, and all of our school districts in here will know that, it costs more money to educate certain types of children. That's not a bad thing, it's the reality. And so how do we make our system fit a changing demographic and a changing student population to ensure that programs that are directed to those students of highest need, school district can afford to do that without having to cut counselors and librarians and everything else on the back end in order to do this. When you look at our outcomes as a state, only 44% of our kids across the state read at grade level in 10th grade. 4 out of 10. That surprises a lot of people, particularly our legislators, who don't really follow that type of information. And only 28% of our kids are attaining a 2-year, 4-year, or a career certification within 6 years of graduation. 3 out of 10. And so when we look at the work that needs our school finance system, how do we build a system that drives to outcomes, to get our kids reading in 3rd grade, to get our kids college and career ready, right? So either looking at ACT, SAT, military readiness, TSI, etc. Because what we're facing on the economic side is not having a qualified workforce. We talked about the 60 by 30 goals, and we are on track. Well, we would say we're not on track, but the Higher Education Coordinating Board would say we're on track to meet that goal. But what it doesn't say is that's not kids from our pipeline, right? So that 60% is in migration too. So we have a really strong economy here, but it's not from our own kids. It's from people coming in from all over, which are driving that number. So we may hit that goal of 60 by 30, but we're certainly not going to hit that goal if we just look at our kids. Right now, we're about 21% of our kids here in Texas. And so what Mr. Williams would say is, you can import all the talent you want, which is great. We are not exporting our dropouts and those that we as a system are failing. That's going to catch up to us at some point, right? The economy is not going to go this strong for years and years and years, so we have to do something now to really fit into that. So I will stop there. I'm sure we can talk more about the specific recommendations coming out of the commission, and then we'll explain what invested text is as we go on.
Great, I think that's a very great opening to our discussion here. And Isaac, did you want to talk specifically about what Dallas County Community College District's priorities wise might have for this upcoming legislative session?
Sure. So we're part of the Texas Association of Community Colleges, and as an association, we've already adopted our priorities. And to no surprise, obviously, sort of stabilized funding for higher education. I think higher education last session took a big hit. If you look at overall four-year universities and include community colleges, which are there are 50 community college systems, if you will, in the state of Texas. We took a bit of a hit, but we were able to actually have a small increase of 1%, but we take that as a victory. So we're going to work on funding. That includes core funding, success points, formula funding, and try to increase success point funding. We definitely believe in accountability. We talked about dual credit earlier. There was discussion about dual credit and the impact it's having on some of the colleges. That's another priority as an association that we're working towards in terms of having by 2030, 30% of high school students take at least 12 credit hours in dual credit. We also want to make sure that we're, everyone, I'm sure everyone sort of faces dual credit in a different way or has a different experience. And we're very fortunate that we're able to provide it with our partners, but some of our sort of sister colleges and other rural areas aren't as fortunate just because of the way they're funded. And there's 3 to 5 different ways community colleges are funded depending on which community college you're speaking with. So what we want to do as part of that dual credit priority is really speak to legislators and say, we want to expand sort of the TEOG grant so schools can apply for grants for their students, so that way they can make sure they're funding dual credit appropriately, to ensure that it's rigorous, and they can find a way to help transfer those classes to degrees as well. So dual credit, formula funding, success point funding, and then sort of our last, I don't want to say last, but our other third priority from association is really sort of workforce. That's really a big thing for community colleges in terms of what we're doing in our partnerships. We talked about Amazon earlier. There was a discussion on that. For us, we want to make sure that we're stabilizing funding for the Jobs Education and Training, the JET program, also Skills Development Funds, or SDF. When you're familiar with that, we want to make sure that we're going to work to try to increase that investment from the state, because it's important, and it's really important to our industry partners as well. Now, from a community college, from a local perspective, I don't want to get ahead of our board, and we have a board presentation today, but we will be discussing other things such as transfer issues, which is really important. We're definitely going to talk about the Promise, which Garrett mentioned earlier, as a partnership that we have with Commit, and how we started in the high schools that had Dallas County Community College, early college high schools, and programs are already in place. So we're going to have that conversation with our board, as well as talking about small business development centers, which is really sort of the backbone, in our opinion, to the economy and what we're doing in the state of Texas. Many of you probably know that non-formula funding is going to be zeroed out. So it really impacts a lot of four-year universities and a lot of community colleges in a big way. For us, that's Small Business Development Centers, or SBDC, which is free consultation, free advice, helping small businesses receive loans and things like that. It's a partnership with SBA. So because those are being zeroed out, we need to find a new home for Small Business Development Centers. And we're working with the governor's office and a few elected officials on where we think it might be the best place to put the SBDC and make sure that they receive the same funding that they received in the prior session. So those are some of the sort of our association and then the discussions. I don't want to say they're priorities because our board hasn't given us a final check if those are priorities. But sort of the discussion and then what we're doing as an association. And yeah, happy to answer any questions regarding that. And I do want to apologize ahead, in advance. I'm Latino, so I speak really fast. So if I'm, going and, a bunch of stuff, feel free to slow down. Slow down.
You don't need to apologize.
So I go pretty quick.
So when we were considering who we wanted to bring to this panel, we really wanted to make sure that we had someone who represented one of our member institutions that's here, and of course Isaac is here representing them, but we also wanted to make sure that our business community was represented, and then our nonprofits and our individuals who look at education on a daily basis, but through a lens from the community aspect. I think we've got some great panelists here for that. But the other part of the purpose was also for us to speak about how we, as representing our various institutions, what we need to know to be prepared, how to react and respond, or how to really make sure that we take advantage of this 5-month opportunity that we get. And after all, here in Texas, our legislature meets for 5 months every other year, and then it goes away after the next election. So with that as kind of a focus, I'd like to throw that question out to our panelists to react what their thoughts are as to what they think that our various institutions, how we can best take advantage of this opportunity that we have in this legislative session. Any thoughts on that, Deborah?
Yeah, so I think that if you look from a public school perspective and a school finance perspective, if you look at where we were 2 years ago heading into the conversation was around vouchers. Do we even support public schools versus vouchers, et cetera? Over the past 2 years, and particularly because of a lot of the work of the commission, we're starting session with school finance is now the #1 issue for both Republicans and Democrats. The presumptive speaker has already said it's his #1 issue. And now we're having a conversation of where should we invest, how much to invest, and where does that money come from? And I think that's really important because that's a dramatically different start from where we're starting session to where we were 2 years ago. I think the other thing that we have to remember too is being realistic about what our legislature is. And so what we have done over the past couple of sessions is we've really shot ourselves in the foot with the nonprofit community and the educational advocates, fighting with one another about, well, you're getting your piece here, but I haven't gotten my piece here, so I'm not going to support that, right? I think we have an opportunity for some really strong legislation, but it's not going to be perfect for everybody. But I think it's really important for the folks to come together around some key belief systems and metrics that we can really support something that's going to be best for kids. And some of those things are, for instance, formula funding, making sure that any new money that's put into the system is in the formula. Like Isaac said, they're zeroing out grant, non-formula funding programs all across. I think if you look at the pre-K grant 2 years ago, that got cut before it even got started because it was in a grant program. So whatever money we put in the system, let's make sure it's in formula, which is lasting, which allows school districts to build and plan and know that that money is going to be there. Second is, let's invest in outcomes. If you look at the School Finance Commission, the Outcomes Committee, and the Expenditures Committee have really narrowed in on incentive-based funding based on outcomes, heavily weighted towards how our economically disadvantaged and English language learner students are doing. And there are key gates, third grade reading, right? So how do we reward districts who are getting their economically disadvantaged students and English language learners proficient in third grade reading by third grade? And how do we make sure that we incentivize them to make the decisions on the front end to be rewarded for that work, right? The same thing at the other end of the pipeline. For every student who's college and career ready, districts would get a financial incentive and a bonus for those students, right? Again, heavily weighted. We're not trying to create a system where just because you're a Highland Park, you're going to get all this money because your kids come in proficient, right? This is all based on growth and heavily weighted toward those student populations. And then let's make sure that we're supporting our highest need students, right? So the things that are put into the formula system, the things that are put into the school finance system, let's make sure, again, they're hitting those targets, the students that we know are behind right now, and we know they're only going to grow more in our state. And then the last tenet is really two things, which is focusing on high impact early literacy. We know that pre-K through 3 is incredibly important. And for those of you that work in that space, I mean, you see it every day. I've got a 1-year-old and an almost 4-year-old, and their brains literally like go nuts at this age. And if they don't have that foundation, it's very hard to catch kids up, particularly once you get past 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade. And then let's focusing on our teachers, right? How do we increase teacher compensation across the state, but doing so in a very targeted way that we're identifying teacher effectiveness, we're differentiating what that looks like, and we're making sure that our most effective teachers are in front of those students who really, really need them the most, right? And we've seen the results of that work in Dallas ISD and other districts that have just seen tremendous outcomes over the past 4 years, which is a short period of time in public education, have turned their district around dramatically because they've focused on those key priorities. And so you'll see up here on the back, Invested Text is a nonpartisan campaign that focuses on those tenets, right? So we've got its other collective impact organizations across the state, so down in Houston, San Antonio, Austin, but it's also big businesses, PNC Bank, our chambers of commerce are looking at this, Children at Risk, other organizations. And so individuals can join, organizations can join, so love for that to be something that you all consider as an organization. You can pull out at any point. The thing right now is we don't know what the legislation is going to do, right? So if legislation comes out that doesn't fit what you as an organization are looking at, by all means, you can back away from that. But if you Invested Text to 52886, you'll immediately get enrolled and get all of our updates on legislation that's coming out. So I think those are just a few of the things.
And I think from the chamber's perspective, I mean, our goals for talent, again, have to do with increasing the educational level of our population. Is one of the things that we found out in the American Community Survey census does is that even though we've got all these great universities, our percentage of individuals in our region that have a bachelor's degree is lower than the national average. And we also had around 100,000 people who had some college and no degree. And some of those people may have certificates, but many of them started a program and stopped. Because we know that as great as all the things that I come from the education world, as many of the supports that we all are offering, we know that too many students start and don't finish, whatever program that is. And so I also look at some of those, where are the entry points in the pipeline and where are some of the leaky parts of the pipeline. So, we mentioned the slide earlier about the high school to higher ed enrollment, whatever higher ed you're talking about, what can we do to incentivize that number going up? What can we do, looking at retention rates and graduation rates, what can we do there to shore that up? What can we do for those individuals who have some college and no degree to get those folks back into some, whether it's a certificate or any sort of program? And then how do we sort of layer solutions so that parts of the systems are talking to each other, so, you know, the person who's in a program, and I know Workforce Solutions and some of the other providers do some of this, but, you know, there are some, you know, organizations that while a person is going to school, you know, their kid can also be getting childcare, or their kid can also be getting after-school reading, you know, types of services. So how do we layer those services so that we both, you know, if the goal is to, you know, reduce childhood poverty, we do things for both the parent and the child. So, you know, things like that are things that we're particularly interested in. We're also looking at, you know, target industries where we think that there may be growth opportunities for those high-wage jobs, high-demand jobs, and how do we help promote those industries? How do we work with you as partners and with our legislative officials to incentivize and get more students prepared for those? So, you know, today it's Amazon, tomorrow it could be any other company. But we want to make sure that we're diversified. We've seen in the Texas economy what happens when we're not diversified. You know, those who lived through the crisis in the past in Dallas-Fort Worth or came from Houston when they were going through their issues. You know, we want to make sure that we're a diversified economy, but we also want to make sure, whether it's, you know, this company this year or this company the next year, talent are looking, you know, for, you know, you mentioned that, you know, you can't necessarily export poverty, and you can't export, you know, those folks. But the flip side of that is those who are looking for places to go, want to come to places where communities are figuring these things out. They want to move into a place that can be able to move in the city or business. So many younger individuals want to move into cities. And so if they're going to only do them, we'll consider putting their kids in public school. So, you know, just sort of the model of it's okay for, you know, good schools over here and not so good schools over here. I think that model is going to go over. We've got to really focus on how do we serve all people.
I have a couple of questions, if I may. How many people in here receive a newsletter or, you know, some email subscription about legislative updates, whether from your institution or you subscribe to another organization? How many of you receive those? About half the room. How many of you have been actually down to Austin during session, whether you attend a hearing or you testify at a hearing, or you actually just walk the halls to knock on a member's door? How many of you have done that? Okay, a handful of you. Okay. Well, that's really good to know because, you know, as Ray said earlier, there's 5 months to sort of get things done in Austin. And, you know, there's this old saying that we love to use every time we get an opportunity that goes, if you're not at the dinner table, you're on the menu. So I definitely want to invite everyone to think about going to Austin, to think, you know, go to the Capitol, walk the halls, knock on your member's door. The best thing you can do when you go to Austin is you go to the member that represents you, whether it's just on the House side or the Senate side, because you're a constituent, you're a voter. And sometimes that opens the door for you, and it won't open it for me if I go to the Rio Grande Valley and try to talk to a member there. They're like, oh, you're from Dallas, you know. We have other priorities because they're trying to speak to constituents or organizations from their district. So I definitely want to invite everyone to go down there. As Garrett said earlier, sign up to receive updates, whether it's Invest at Texas or whether you go to our website, dccd.edu, under Government Affairs tab. We also send out a legislative update every week during the session that talks about these are the bills that were filed. This is how it impacts specifically community college, but also sort of education generally and workforce. Because it's important for you to know, because we're always asking for volunteers, we're always asking for people to call. One of the things that we've realized that's important, we did this last session for SBDC, was we went to the districts and spoke to our SBDC clients who had businesses for specific members and asked them to use their logo. We got sort of a quick testimonial. We produced a one-pager, and they were targeted to specific members from those districts, specifically for those committee members. So I can go to an office and say, hey, you know, Bill Jones is in your district. He owns, you know, Craft Brew Plus, and you know, his business is important. He's an SBDC client. This is how he's growing his business. It increased tax base. It created jobs, and then they're able to pay attention. So when issues pop up that impact you, impact your organization, I think that's when you can really sort of jump in and make an impact, because there's nothing more important than those members when they hear from people, organizations that are in their district. And that's really helpful to the people that are in Austin, such as myself, and other organizations that have sort of advocates out there walking and knocking on these doors. And when we know there's other individuals, sort of the cavalry's coming, especially when the bill's in the floor for a vote or in committee when we're trying to stop it from coming out or trying to push a bill out. Because as many of you know, there's, you know, oh gosh, 2017 was 11,000 bills, I think so it was overall, right? Resolutions, bills on the Senate side, on the House side, and there's a 20% passing rate for all those bills. So there's going to be a lot of bills filed. A lot of those are bad bills, in my opinion. Some of those are bills we want them to pass. So it's really important when you're out there knocking on those doors, because we have those 5 months, and if you think about it, we really have less than 5 months, because the first 30 days are always emergency items that the governor announces, and they won't hear any other bills. So we really have 4 months after that to really make an impact. So it's just important to sort of be engaged and hear some of those bills. And I invite you to go to the websites for the Senate and the House and look at some of those bills. They're always posted on there, right? The Capitol, the Texas Legislature online posts every single bill. Like, for example, last week, we were in D.C. Having meetings on the Hill, but I received an alert that Representative Bergman filed a bill repealing Noriega, right? That's in-state tuition for all high school students, whether undocumented or not. And that's, for us, when we have a large population of the DACA students and undocumented students, it's important. So it's important to keep track, and then we'll also send those out in our legislative update. And it makes a difference. So when you're able to go and talk to those members and say, this is why it impacts my district or how it affects my district, it's a really good start, and it's a really good way to know your members well.
Okay. Well, thank you. And as we approach the end of our time allotted for our panel here, I'd like to go back. It's going by quickly.
Yeah.
I'd like to go back and just talk about the differences that we've sensed. And 2 years ago, you'll remember, we were talking about a very different type of expectation with the legislative session. Last night, I had an opportunity to be with 3 of our state reps, and all 3 of them consistently said that it's all about school funding. It's all about school funding. And as I talked with students, a lot of them, when I asked, what do you look for out of the Texas State Legislature, they were all talking about funding for Texas Grant. So with that, as a preface, would our 2 panelists here at the moment would you please share a little bit about what optimism you have and what your sense of things that might that we might not be expecting that might come out of the blue, out of this legislative session that might surprise us, but something that you're looking forward to, a sense of optimism.
Yeah, I mean, I think 6 months ago I was optimistic and people thought I was crazy. I think that there really isn't, what I keep saying is that if school finance reform doesn't happen this session, I'm going to become very pessimistic that it's going to happen in future sessions, because there's been so much work done and so much consensus among folks that usually don't have consensus heading into session. So we have the heads of both the House committee and the Senate committee who are Republicans that are very much on board with a lot of key concepts, which is we need more money into the system, right? New money. And I think that's an important thing, right? So you're going to hear folks during session talk about what I would call new spend, right? Taking existing pots of money in the formula and spending them in a different way, which would benefit students, right? Like taking money and putting more into the basic allotment, et cetera, which would be beneficial, but it's not new dollars, right? So what we're saying is that's great, but we also need new revenue. The biggest question is going to be, where does that revenue come from, right? And there's been some proposals that have come out. We've got the rainy day fund. There's always a discussion around that. We'll probably see that used for Hurricane Harvey. There's been a strong biennium on the Permian Basin oil reserves, and so there's a amount of revenue that can come from that. Then you're going to get into conversations with the oil and gas industry around if you can take that money, et cetera. And then you're going to see a whole host of other taxes. What's interesting about Texas is you hear a lot about property tax, right? And we are the 6th largest property tax burden in the country. However, on a total tax burden, we're actually 46th in the nation in the total tax burden that our residents face. So yes, we're very heavy on property tax, which fund a majority of schools. But in terms of total tax, we are not a high tax state. So there is opportunity for, maybe it's 0.25% on the sales tax, maybe it's adding in some sin taxes, whether that's alcohol, sugar, you name it, right? So I think that's going to be the biggest discussion. I think where it's going to be important for all the advocates to come together, and which is where I'm really hopeful, is I think we're going to be able to keep people focused on kids and on outcomes versus having a conversation on taxes, right? If we keep the conversations on students and school districts and children, I think that we're going to get to where we need to go with revenue. If the conversation veers towards taxes, right, and we put students to the back burner, I think you're going to get very different outcomes. So I think it's imperative, Mr. Williams at the commission last week said, I wish we had the same amount of urgency in the state towards kids and students than we do towards taxes and tax relief, right? But I'm optimistic. I think probably 9 to 10 of the commission members out of the 13 are all looking forward, saying we need new money. It's now a question of, is it $2 billion a biennium? Is it 3? Is it 4? What does that number look like, right? We were really close last session to get 1.8 billion, and it got caught up in a voucher discussion with ESAs and vouchers, and it got killed, right? Adults, right? We focused on adults, we didn't focus on kids. I think that we have a really good shot for a couple of $1 billion. I think, we would like to see closer to 5. Maybe it's going to be closer to 2. Hey, a buy-in. But, the closer we can get to restoring those 2011 cuts, and again, in an equitable manner, focus on outcomes, focus on our kids and our teachers, I think we have a good chance at something, right? It's just, how good is it going to be? So,
I'm an optimist as well, and I think we do have a good chance at something. I think what's going to happen is, the governor released his sort of property tax plan where it caps revenue at 2.5%, impacts cities, impacts schools. That's going to take up a lot of oxygen and a lot of political capital, in my opinion, when session starts. So Garrett's right. What's going to happen when we start the conversation and focus on children and what can we do? But that property tax debate is going to be fierce. It was fierce last session. I think it'll be, it's going to occupy time. And I'm not saying that they'll go into a special session that they did last time around for property tax. So depending on what happens and sort of with the goodwill of both chambers towards that issue, I think it's going to determine what really happens. But you're right. We have, Comptroller Ben Hager came on this summer, so there was an additional $2 billion, I think, that was going to go into general revenue. But if you look at Hurricane Harvey, if you look at the infrastructure, the deferred payment on the highway spending, things like that, that gets gobbled up really quickly. Medicaid, those things that $2 billion is gone. So you're right. Are they going to tap into the rainy day fund? I know the committee on the Senate side or just voted, say they want to keep at least the minimum balance of 7.5. We'll see what sort of the leadership wants to do. But going back to how this conversation started at the very beginning, there's a bit of a shift in the House in terms of members, 67 members, Democratic members. The Senate doesn't have a super majority. There'll be one. All they need to change is one senator from the Republican to say, you know what, I don't really believe that this is the way to go, and change the dynamics of the whole Senate. And that's possible. And I personally think that person could be sort of Senator Kelliger, who's the Higher Education Committee Chairman, just because of his history and what he's done politically in Austin. So it'll be interesting. I'm an optimist. I think we'll get certain things done for sure. Of course, we have to work. We have a lot of work in front of us. It is about partnerships. It is about collaboration. It is about trying to work with others. We really partner with industries, nonprofits, just different organizations to get our priorities across and get them signed at the end of the day, because that's what's important for our colleges, for our students. But it'll be interesting to see how things turn out. And I think the key thing will be when the governor gives the State of the State address in January. Once that speaker's sworn in, let's see how many times they start meeting the first 4 to 6 weeks. I think that will tell what's going to happen. Because if we look back at the last session we had where they did meet, where the speaker, the attorney governor were sort of on the outside, they have those constant meetings. The governor has revamped his staff. If you look at who his sort of chief lobbyist is, and some of his staff, he's changed that. I think he wants to be more engaged. Where a lot of these speaker staff and members of the legislature saw him as sort of disengaged last session, I think this session could be more engaged. So we'll see how all that plays out. If they're having meetings, frequent meetings, I think it bodes well to get more things done.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, we're really encouraged, partly based on some of the momentum of last session. Regardless of where you stand on issues like bathroom bill and others, I think what our business community learned from that was that if they are invested and they are part of the conversation and they are paying attention, they can influence what happens. And so I think going into this session, I think what our members are looking at is, what data do they need? So whether it's maybe from education or workforce standpoint,
I do want to add a quote, I'm gonna mess it up, I'm sure, but the long-term, long-serving Lieutenant Governor Bob Woodward once said, you want to get something done at the Capitol, you have to have business involved. And you're right, seeing business involved in that session, I think we need to sort of change some of the dynamics there as well.
Well, I think, to Isaac's point earlier about being engaged with your constituents, if you look at school funding, in particular tied to the tax issue and the business community, 3 districts on election day that were bigger than 30,000 students, so Dallas, Richardson, and Ector County, out in El Paso, Amarillo, I don't know. Midland. They all had tax referendums to increase their taxes to the maximum rate. All of those communities voted for that. So with property taxes going through the roof, with people being stretched, communities came out and voted to increase their taxes to support public education. From the business community, the Dallas Regional Chamber put up $500,000 to support the campaign to raise their own taxes. So as much as certain legislatures want to say that taxes are such a huge issue and that people won't support it and that this has to be their own issue, we've seen time and time again, people vote to increase their own taxes, and in some corporations, in a millions and millions of dollars way to support public ed. And so I think it's important to continue to get those messages out, because you're going to hear a lot of stories from folks that say, well, so-and-so lost their home, so-and-so had to leave. It's like, well, if you have one of the largest regional chambers in the entire state, put up money, spend their own money to raise their own taxes to support public ed. I think we're going to have a lot more consensus. I think you see people like Kel Seliger, Senator Larry Taylor, who in the past have maybe not been as supportive. I think we're going to be very supportive of public school financial reform and more money. And to Isaac's point, they only need one person now, right? So it's going to be very hard to push something through with some very reasonable folks who've already been talking publicly saying we have to do this. I mean, Kel Seliger at a small town hall was reported said, this isn't a state issue, this is a Republican issue. We need to just have the political will to do this, right? And I think that's very tough.
Right, and I think related to that, I think we also have to think about what are some of the tangential issues, and not necessarily look at them as distractions, but see how they fit. I mean, because you look at, transportation, housing, they don't necessarily qualify as when you look at specifically as education issues, but the homes that the kids in your district live in affect a lot about the experience they have in their classrooms. And so things that we can do to make housing more affordable for our residents, I think are things that we got to think about. So transportation for parents, so these kids can't get to and from work. We have colleges even in our region that are you can't get to by bus. So there are things that affect real lives that may not necessarily be the actual what happens in the walls of the classroom, but are things that will impact them. So we have to think about that.
Well, we've gone over the time allotted for our panel this morning. So I want to really thank our panel this morning. I think they shared a lot of great information with us, and I ask you to give them a round of applause for their time and effort.